At a prestigious academic symposium at Princeton, a simply dressed woman sat quietly at the back of the room. When she finally spoke up, a renowned professor cut her off with a condescending smirk. Math isn't exactly a subject for housewives. But just minutes later, he was speechless, because he had no idea that the woman he mocked was a hidden math prodigy once pursued by MIT like a living treasure. At the heart of Princeton University, where minds sharpen like blades and egos float like clouds, an open seminar on applied mathematics was underway. The auditorium buzzed with quiet tension, filled with sharp-suited scholars, grad students scribbling notes, and world-renowned thinkers exchanging guarded glances. And then she walked in. Claire Mitchell, 38, from a modest home in New Jersey. Her clothes were simple, a beige cardigan over a faded blouse, slacks she probably owned for years. Her gray hair was neatly tied in a low bun, the kind you'd expect on a retired librarian or a Sunday school teacher. She held nothing but a worn notebook and a pencil, no laptop, no credentials, no name tag swinging from her neck. Just presence. Quiet presence. She slipped into a chair in the farthest corner. No one noticed. No one turned. And why would they? To them, she looked like someone's mother who'd wandered in by mistake. A well-meaning bystander. Not someone who had spent 20 years obsessing over a math problem too abstract for most minds. Claire didn't come to impress. She didn't need a stage. She came with a heart full of questions, and a mind that had never stopped working, even as life kept her busy with bills, caregiving, and casseroles. She listened, carefully, scribbling notes, nodding at equations. For a moment, you could almost see the spark in her eyes. She wasn't here to take up space. She was here to contribute to the solution. But the room wasn't ready for her. Not yet. At the center of the room, standing beneath the glow of overhead lights and the weight of expectation, was Professor Leonard Greaves, a man who had long since forgotten what it meant to listen. 63 years old, with salt and pepper hair immaculately combed back and a tailored charcoal suit that seemed almost too stiff for comfort, Greaves wasn't just a professor, he was an institution. A legend at Princeton, a mind revered in the world of algorithmic analysis, logic, and computational theory. But for all his accolades, humility was not among them. As he lectured, his voice didn't teach, it commanded. His tone sharp, his vocabulary intentionally dense, like every word was meant to keep others out rather than invite them in. He gestured to a whiteboard filled with symbols and equations that curled like ivy, beautiful, yes, but suffocating in their complexity. As you can see, he said, eyes scanning the room, the derivative collapses into a recursive loop only if the substructure remains irreducibly entangled. This is trivial, of course, to those who understand. A few nervous chuckles. A few heads nodded, most from fear of appearing lost. And there he stood, basking in the quiet awe of a room too polite or too intimidated to challenge him. For Leonard Greaves, this wasn't a seminar. It was a performance, a one-man play with an audience trained to clap. He didn't see Claire. He didn't even glance in her direction. To him, the back of the room was just background noise, furniture, shadows, and silence. But what he didn't know was that the silence was watching. And it had teeth. The room had grown still. Equations floated in the air like invisible fog, dense, difficult, and incomplete. Claire, sitting quietly in the back, leaned forward. Her hand trembled just slightly as she raised it. Not out of fear of math, she knew numbers better than most, but fear of being seen. Truly seen. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice more like a breeze than a bell. "But wouldn't that recursive structure break if the coefficients realign under a dual symmetric limit?" A pause. Heads turned. Professor Greaves blinked, then raised one eyebrow, high, exaggerated. He tilted his head like an actor in a Shakespearean play and gave a short, breathy laugh. "Madam," he said with deliberate condescension, "you may not understand. This is advanced mathematics, not a baking recipe." Laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. Enough to sting. Some students chuckled awkwardly, not knowing why. Others looked down at their notes, suddenly ashamed of the room they were sitting in. Claire said nothing. She simply gripped her pencil a little tighter. Her knuckles pale. Not because she was angry, but because this moment, this exact moment, was the one she had feared for 2 decades. To be seen and dismissed. To speak and be told she didn't belong. But she didn't come here to argue. She came here to try something she had never dared before. To step out of the shadow she had lived in for most of her life, and into the light of her own mind. And though her voice had been quieted, her spirit had not. Not even close. Before the gray hair and the quiet dignity. Before the cardigan and the shy smile in the back of a Princeton hall. There was Claire Mitchell, age 21, walking the marble halls of MIT with a backpack full of dreams and a mind that professors whispered about behind closed doors. They called her the anomaly. She didn't just solve problems, she reimagined them. At a time when others were still struggling with proofs, Claire was quietly building entire frameworks of her own. Her professors knew she was headed somewhere, perhaps the Institute for Advanced Study, perhaps even a Fields Medal one day. But in 1985, a single phone call changed the trajectory of her life. Her mother had been diagnosed terminal, and so Claire left MIT. Just like that. No dramatic farewell. No published thesis. No goodbyes. She packed her books, went home to New Jersey, and became a caregiver full-time. Years passed. Her mother passed. And when the grief finally quieted, the world had moved on without her. Claire didn't try to chase it. She became a librarian, tutored neighborhood kids in algebra, took care of neighbors, grew into the background. But her love for math, it never dimmed. Every night, after the world had gone to sleep, she'd open an old composition notebook, its corners bent, its spine frayed, and write. Equations, theorems, endless pages of ideas she had no one to share with. Not for grades, not for glory, but because something deep in her soul needed to. Because math, to her, wasn't a subject. It was a language, a rhythm, a quiet sanctuary where the world made sense. And though no one had asked for her brilliance in decades, she had never stopped being brilliant. The professor's voice continued to echo across the lecture hall, lines of formulas flashing on the projector like an orchestra of logic, except one note was off. He was deep into his proof now. A theoretical framework on dynamic systems and nonlinear optimization. Beautifully complex, yes, but Claire saw something no one else did. A gap. A small misstep, almost imperceptible, like a hairline crack in an elegant glass sculpture. But to a trained eye, it was everything. Claire looked down at her notebook, already scribbled with annotations. She could stay quiet. No one expected her to speak again. But something inside her stirred. Not pride, not ego. Just truth. So she lifted her hand. Slow. Calm. Like she was reaching into the silence itself. Excuse me, she said, voice soft but clear. I believe there may be an alternative formulation, a simpler one. There was a pause, as if the air itself had frozen. Professor Greaves turned, irritation flickering in his eyes. His tone was tight. Oh, do enlighten us, miss? Mitchell. Claire Mitchell. A few chuckles rustled through the room, muffled, unsure. But Claire stood, not grandly, not dramatically. She simply walked to the whiteboard at the side of the room, took up a marker, and began to write. Her handwriting was steady. Her lines, elegant, fluid. She didn't try to attack the professor's logic. She reframed the problem entirely, bypassing the tangle of complexity with a clean, graceful solution drawn from symmetry and insight. It took less than a minute. Then silence. Not mocking. Not dismissive. Just stillness. Thick, hanging stillness. Professor Greaves squinted at the board. His brow furrowed. He leaned in, reading each step. Then he turned slowly toward her. If you believe this is valid, he said, voice now a touch sharper, then prove it. Fully. It was no longer a scoff. It was a challenge. And Claire, finally, was ready to meet it. The chalk felt heavier than it looked. It trembled just slightly between Claire's fingers, faint, almost imperceptible. But she steadied it, pressing it gently to the board. Her hand may have trembled, but her eyes were steady. Clear. Focused. She took a breath, not deep or dramatic, just quiet, like someone making peace with gravity before taking flight. And then she began. Line by line, Claire drew from the depths of her memory, not from slides or notes, but from years of nightly solitude, from ink-stained journals and whispered theorems spoken only to herself. The room had grown still. The rustle of notebooks stopped. Even the projector's hum seemed to dim. At first, a few students exchanged glances. Who is she? One whispered. She's not on the faculty list, another murmured. But their whispers faded as their eyes followed her logic. Claire wasn't just solving a problem. She was unfolding it. The dense, tangled threads of Professor Greaves's earlier formulation, she didn't fight them. She rewove them. A substitution here, a reduction there, a shift in coordinates that bypassed 3 entire steps. It was clean, precise, almost beautiful. Her voice, when she spoke, was like water over stones. Instead of using Greaves's integral constraint here, We take advantage of the boundary conditions already present in the system. Greaves leaned forward now, elbows on the table, no longer smirking. Claire continued, her chalk gliding across the board with newfound rhythm. This wasn't a woman trying to prove herself. This was a woman who had already done the work, alone, in silence, for decades. And now, for the first time, someone was watching. By the time she reached the final step, the room was silent. No one laughed. No one blinked. Because in that quiet, ordinary woman with the graying bun and second-hand shoes, they saw something undeniable. Brilliance. The final stroke of chalk landed with a soft tap. Claire stepped back from the board, her hands lightly dusted in white. No flourish. No grand gesture. Just the quiet dignity of someone who let her work speak. A full solution. Elegant. Efficient. And then, one last line she hadn't been asked for. I also noticed, she said gently, turning to face the room, in the third slide of your presentation, Professor Greaves, there's a misalignment in the eigenvalue estimation. It creates a ripple error in the convergence sequence. She wasn't smug. She wasn't condescending. She simply pointed it out, like one might tuck in the corner of a crooked painting or straighten a leaning frame. The room went stiller, if that was even possible. Then, somewhere in the back, a slow clap began. One of the older faculty members, eyes wide, nodded as he clapped again. Another joined. Then another. And then the applause spread like a quiet wave, polite at first, then warm, then unmistakable. Students sat wide-eyed, whispering to each other, stunned. She corrected him. That was insane. Did you see that reduction she used? I've never even thought of it that way. Professor Greaves stood frozen, still facing the board, as if it might offer him a way to rewrite history. But the math was there, written in neat lines, impossible to deny. His jaw twitched. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. Just a faint flush crawling up from his collar. He gave a curt nod, lips pressed tightly, and turned away. Not in defeat, but in silent retreat. Claire didn't smile. She didn't bow. She just returned to her seat, same quiet posture, same soft presence, as though she hadn't just redrawn the lines of respect in that room. But everyone knew. In that moment, they saw her. As the room gradually returned to its normal hum, Claire quietly slipped her notebook back into her worn canvas bag. The applause had long faded. Conversations were beginning again. Greaves was nowhere to be seen. She didn't linger, not to bask, not to celebrate. She stood up, straightened the collar of her simple cardigan, and gently pushed her chair back in place, like a respectful guest who never intended to stay too long. No one noticed at first, until a single voice rose behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Wait, please." She turned, surprised. A young man in his early 30s, wearing a Princeton faculty badge, hurried toward her with a notebook clutched in his hand. "I'm Dr. Ethan Brooks," he said, a bit breathless. I had to ask. Your approach to the recursive logic and the dimensional shift, it's unlike anything I've ever seen. Where did you study? Where do you teach?" Claire tilted her head slightly, her gray eyes kind and amused. "I studied once," she said softly. "A long time ago. But I teach now just down the road." He blinked. "You do?" She nodded. "Every Tuesday and Thursday. At the Trenton Public Library. I volunteer at the community center, small math group for teens." He looked stunned. "You teach that, at a library?" Claire smiled, not proudly, not boastfully. Just a quiet, content smile, like someone who knew where she belonged. "I just love math," she said simply. "Always have." And with that, she gently patted his arm and turned to leave. But the moment lingered. Not because of what she solved, but because of what she reminded everyone in that room. That brilliance doesn't always wear a title. Sometimes it walks in unnoticed and leaves the world a little more awake. Within hours, a discreet recording of Claire's calm, yet brilliant explanation began to circulate quietly among the mathematics community. What started as a murmur in online forums quickly grew into a buzz that even reached the hallowed halls of MIT and Princeton. The video showed Claire's quiet determination, her clear logic, and the moment when she uncovered the flaw in Professor Greaves's complex theory. It wasn't just a mathematical correction. It was a lesson in humility and brilliance concealed beneath simplicity. Soon, invitations arrived, formal, respectful, and impossible to ignore. MIT's Department of Mathematics extended an exclusive invitation for Claire to present at their upcoming symposium on simplifying complex systems. Princeton followed with a special offer for her to lead a workshop on innovative problem-solving methods. In the midst of this sudden recognition, Professor Leonard Greaves found himself under scrutiny. The department chair requested that he publicly address the error, a rare and humbling moment for the once untouchable scholar. His colleagues urged him to acknowledge Claire's correction as a testament to the power of fresh perspectives, even those from unexpected voices. Greaves stood before a packed auditorium days later, his voice measured but sincere. In the pursuit of knowledge, we must always remain open to new ideas, to new minds. Ms. Mitchell's insight has reminded us of that truth. Meanwhile, Claire continued her quiet life, the invitations a gentle reminder that genius sometimes waits patiently to be seen. Her story wasn't just about math, it was about courage, resilience, and the quiet power of never giving up on what you love. The world of academia had changed that day, and all because one simple woman dared to speak up. One quiet afternoon, a small, unexpected envelope arrived at Claire's modest home in New Jersey. The handwriting was shaky but full of earnest care, clearly from a young hand. She carefully opened it, revealing a letter from a middle school girl named Emma. The words inside were simple, but they carried a weight that touched Claire's heart deeply. Dear Ms. Mitchell, I never liked math. I thought it was boring and too hard. But then I saw the video of you explaining things so clearly and confidently. You made math feel alive. You made me believe I could understand it too. Thank you for showing me that even someone like me can be good at math. Sincerely, Emma. Claire sat back, the letter trembling in her hands. Tears welled up in her eyes, tears not of sadness, but of profound relief and quiet joy. For the first time in decades, she felt seen. Not as a forgotten librarian, not as a simple woman, but as someone whose passion and knowledge could inspire others, even young girls still struggling to find their place in the world. She whispered softly to herself, "This is why I never gave up." The letter was more than words on paper. It was a lifeline, a bridge connecting her past sacrifices to a future filled with hope. Emma's faith rekindled Claire's own spirit, reminding her that true value isn't measured by titles or prestige, but by the impact we leave on others' lives. And in that quiet moment, Claire understood. Her journey wasn't just about proving her genius to others, it was about lighting the way for those who would come after her. Months later, Claire found herself standing on a modest stage at a STEM conference dedicated to inspiring middle-aged women. The venue was filled with faces eager for encouragement, women who, like Claire, had felt overlooked or underestimated in their passions and careers. She wasn't a polished public speaker, nor did she seek the spotlight. But when asked to share her story, Claire accepted, not out of vanity or bitterness, but from a genuine desire to connect and inspire. Her voice was calm yet steady as she spoke, weaving through the highs and lows of her journey. She told them about the years spent in the shadows, abandoning a promising career to care for her mother, quietly nurturing her love for math in the evenings, and the sting of dismissal she faced when she finally dared to speak up. There was no anger in her words, only a heartfelt sincerity. "I never wanted to prove anyone wrong," she said softly. "I only wanted to be understood. To show that love for a subject, for knowledge, doesn't come with a flashy resume or fancy titles." She paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of women who nodded in silent agreement. Talent doesn't need to be loudly announced. Sometimes it just needs a moment to be heard, to be seen. And that moment can change everything. Her story struck a chord deep within the audience. For many, Claire wasn't just a mathematician. She was a symbol of quiet strength, resilience, and the power of passion carried through years of struggle. As she stepped down from the stage, the room erupted into applause, not just for her math skills, but for the courage to share her truth so openly. Claire had become an unexpected beacon, reminding everyone that brilliance often blooms quietly, waiting for its chance to shine. As Claire's story settled into the hearts of her listeners, a deeper truth emerged, one that transcended math and academia. It was a reminder etched in the silence between her words, resonating softly but powerfully. Never underestimate a person by their appearance or status. Genius often hides in the quietest corners, behind the simplest clothes, or in the shadows of unnoticed lives. The harsh walls of academic pride and prejudice can sometimes crush the brightest minds before they even have a chance to shine. Her journey was not just about proving her intelligence. It was about breaking down the invisible barriers that silence so many gifted souls. Maybe right now, somewhere in your community, perhaps in a small, dusty library or an unassuming living room, there's another Claire quietly solving equations, writing notes, nurturing dreams the world has yet to notice. This story is a call to listen more closely, to look beyond the surface, and to hold space for those unheard voices. Because true brilliance is not always loud. Sometimes it waits patiently until someone believes enough to give it a chance. Subscribe to hear more stories of courage, unexpected genius, and the human spirit's quiet power to change the world. Stay curious, stay kind, and never stop listening.